No problem. So next we have just we usually like to go over our norms, just to make sure we keep them in mind. So David, could I ask you to, as our vice chair? Or you can
course,
give that off to Dick, because he enjoys.
No, I got it. I got it. So the norms are, we will start and end on time, maximum of 2 hours. We will be prepared for agenda items. The agenda will prioritize the most important issues. We will have time limits on agenda items. All members will have an opportunity to speak if they so choose. We will listen to who is speaking and focus on the issue at hand. And we will not micromanage the superintendent.
Okay, thank you, David. Okay,
I move the consent agenda.
Okay, is there a second to the consent agenda motion? That was Julie. Okay. The consent agenda, which covers minutes and a couple of hiring positions. So there's no objection to, well, anyway, yeah, would have heard it. So all in favor of approving the consent agenda as presented, please raise your hand, or yeah, got raised hand there.
Unanimous.
Okay, unanimous. Thank
Except
you.
I didn't see Betsy. All right.
Well, Betsy's not voting.
Okay. All right. Okay.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, so we move on to BRSU data presentation. For this, I'm going to turn my mic off.
Yeah, can I screen share, or are you gonna screen share, Randy?
I just did.
Not in the Zoom. Yeah, you have to screen share in the Zoom. You got to just click the big one up. Yep, there you go. Yep. You gotta click the lock in the bottom left. And now click the checkbox next to Zoom. That's not gonna work. Can you?
Share with you? I'll let you
Only the host can. If you can make me a co-host or something, I can do it.
Let's try this.
800 EQ up at the top. Yes. Okay, looks good. Cool. Okay. So what we have here this evening is just a review of the goals that we set last year. We'll review those, and then we'll take a look at some data that was generated as a result of the last school year. And just to refresh, when we set goals, the state of Vermont expects us to set goals in the area of academic proficiency, which you can see curriculum coordination, local assessment system, instructional practices, and proficiency-based learning, all of those levers, if you will, underneath that title. And then safe and healthy schools, which is our multi-tiered system of support, social emotional health, physical well-being, and physical environment. Those are the kind of indicators that the Agency of Education provides to us as we engage in goal setting. So we'll take about an hour tonight. We have 20 minutes for me to present and review the data around academic proficiency. And then I figured we would have, there would likely be points of conversation as a result of that. And then after that question period, we would take a look at our safe and healthy schools goal, and then articulate the goals that we have for the coming year. And that would be followed by some questions as well. Okay, so just to recap, when we goal set last year, we used the iReady diagnostic assessment as our measure to set a goal. So it is a computer adaptive assessment. Last year was the first year that we used it. Essentially, it offers a complete picture of student performance and growth. We use it mainly for growth locally. It sets a personalized learning path. There's a tool that goes along with it called iReady Instruction, which is computerized instruction that responds to the student's performance on a diagnostic. Okay, it is administered 3 times a year, and it's normed referenced with 1.5 million students in grades kindergarten through 8 nationwide. The goal that we set last year was by the end of 2021, the school year 2021, comprehensive computer adaptive assessment data. In this instance, we said iReady. This was a change from NWEA MAP, which we had used in previous years. And we're looking at the consistent implementation of our curriculum and instructional models leading to continuous growth. And we have identified 65% of our students representing historically marginalized groups, achieving annual typical growth in the areas of reading and mathematics. And that historically marginalized groups has a significant definition that the Agency of Education provides to us. That includes students with disabilities, students of color. There's a variety of other groups that get historically marginalized. Essentially, in the state of Vermont, there's not a lot of diversity among these historically marginalized groups when it comes to in our community populations. So you'll see, and I'll explain a little bit further as we take a look at some of the data, but there are some instances where we have to put groups together to have a large enough N size to be reportable without being using identifiable data. Okay. So 65% on an assessment like this, because it is norm reference, if you think in terms of a bell curve, the average student at any grade level is in the 50th percentile. So the projection would be for that kid to get to the 50th percentile. So 65% of our kids is actually ahead of the norm group of 4.5 million. That makes sense. So the 2021 results, we had 47% of all. So we took a look at all of our students. So in this instance, the K-8 assessment is about 1,000 kiddos. So 47% met in reading, only 42% met in math. So at this point, we'll take a look at some of those historically marginalized groups, and we'll take a look at growth data. So it's important, we're going to delineate between growth and performance data. For the sake of review of this goal, we're talking about growth. And if this would, there we go. So here are the growth percentage of students meeting growth. So these are bodies, right? So 39% of our students on IEPs met their annual growth. Yep.
I guess we can't really, you know, you were saying 1,000 kids K-8, but you know, it's a subset. You know, this goal is a subset of that group.
Yep. Yeah, that's where we're going into. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yep. So to recap, you can see it there. Essentially, the larger block that says 47% of all is comprised of, if we were to look at demographic factors, they're kind of broken down by the stripes there. So the sum of those, all of those things combined equals the whole of the 47% of all students meeting their annual growth. Okay, so if a student was on an IEP, if we had, it's about 13% of our student population have IEPs. Around 40% of those, 13% of the larger slice met their growth as projected by the computer adaptive assessment. Okay, if students were on non-IEP students, 48% of those kids that were not on an IEP met their growth. Okay, so there's a 9% disparity there. Same thing for economically disadvantaged. 43% of those students met their growth. Students who are non-economically disadvantaged, 50% of those students met their growth. So I use the term historically marginalized as defined by the Agency of Education, and we took our ethnicity and racial data combined those students so that the N size was large enough to be reportable. And that was 47% of those folks met their growth. And then if you're a member of a non-historically marginalized group, 47% of those folks met their growth as well. Okay, and that's all in the area of reading. And in the area of math, there was about a 13% difference between IEP students and non-IEP students, 5% difference for economically disadvantaged, and then a 12% difference. And again, these are whole bodies. So this is 12% of students difference. And that is for meeting annual typical growth, which is a finish line that is calculated by examining the norm group. So they look at students that are biologically the same age and assigned to the same grade level, and they take their like demographics and they say, according to our calculations, based on our N size of 4.5 million kiddos K to 8, a student who scores this score in the fall should end up here in the spring. And that's how they determine their annual typical growth. Okay. So that was growth. That was just reviewing last year's growth goals. Henceforth, I believe we're looking at placement. So placement means achievement score. So performance on an assessment. So the first bar, this is in the area of reading, as you can see in the upper right-hand corner. The first bar is the last data set that was unaffected by COVID-19. And that is the national distribution. And if you look at the national distribution, you're looking at 4.1 million kids, K to 8. You can see the color codes, mid and on grade level, early on grade, a grade below, 2 grades below, 3+ grades below. The second bar is a national in-school population to date. So the folks that I already, you can see the date range that is provided from March 2nd to June 26th of this past school year. That includes 4.1 million kiddos. What they tried to do is they tried to make the best effort to do apples to apples and not have distance learners assessments rolled in there. They compared to in-person kids. So our N size is 945 students, which is less than our total enrollment. Those types of things happen as kids either don't complete the assessment, some of them don't take it because it's not, if students have accommodations that it can't accommodate, that's what our N size is. So 945 students K to 8. We landed pretty similarly with the national in-school population of last year. Okay, if you take a look at those bars, they're very similar in value. We have a little bit more on the top end of on grade and mid on grade. Okay. So mid on grade refers to students who may be considered proficient for their grade. So if they got green, the darker green is considered the on grade level. Okay. What you'll see next is the same type of setup, except for mathematics, as denoted in the upper right-hand corner. You can see a significant difference between the historical norms of spring 18-19, which again is the last assessment that was conducted without any COVID influence, and the national in-school population. You can see a significant number of kids are below grade level from the norm group, which in this instance was 4.5 million kids. And again, very similarly, you can see that we're pretty on pace with the norm group. So our subset of 961 kids placed very similarly to the students that are part of that 4.5 million norm group. Okay. So now what you'll see is those historically marginalized groups that I pulled out before around growth. We'll take a look at placement. And in this instance, the color codes are very similar, except we don't have like a lighter green. Because this is, so essentially, just to clarify, what we're doing is we're kind of zooming in on our bar with an eye towards demographics. So you can see there are students that are on IEPs, and this is in the area of reading. 16% of those students were considered on grade level by the assessment. And if you were a student who is not on IEP, 60% of that population were considered on grade level. So the next set will be IEP for math. So very similar looking distributions for both content areas. And I know in the past we've discussed, or that you have all discussed, math seeing the most significant impact of COVID-19, essentially. Reading scores nationally have been kind of consistent, and math scores have been adversely affected. So very similar demographic breakdown, economically disadvantaged. Here's how our students who are economically disadvantaged fared in reading versus their non-economically disadvantaged peers. Okay. Appropriate pace, we're good, okay. So next up will be math for economically disadvantaged folks. So you're looking at about a 20% difference in percentage of students placed. So this is our historically marginalized by ethnicity or race subset. Pretty similar performance in reading. And you'll see very similar performance in math as well. Okay, so that was a look at our goal from last year, essentially, and using that iReady metric. This year's goals are going to be focused on the Smarter Balance Assessment Consortium, computer adaptive test, and performance tasks as well. So just as a reminder, this is the metric that is used to record, to be publicly facing in the annual snapshot on the site that the state puts out. It's two parts. It's a computer adaptive test and a performance task. It adjusts the difficulty of questions through the assessment based on the student's response. So it's computer adaptive in the same way that iReady is. It essentially, if it looks for a ceiling on a student ability. So students will get a question wrong, and then it'll kick them down. If they get multiple questions correct in a row, it'll increase its difficulty until it finds where they top out. Okay. And this is conducted in the spring annually, and for students grades 3 to 8 in both ELA and mathematics. So the group sizes we have, historically, it's been 740-ish, 750 historically. This test has been going on since 2014. This past year, our N size was like 660 students that took the test. This is our performance compared to the state of Vermont. We'll go significantly deeper into the performance of our historically marginalized groups, as well as look at trends over time for our performance and the performance of the state as well, because it's an interesting data set to look at. Okay. So here, this is for students on IEPs. The reason that there are only 2 years, even though I said the assessment has been conducted since 2014, we use the agency reporting system to pull our demographic data from, and they only had 2 years available to us to filter by IEP status. So IDEA stands for Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, it's a federal law. So the significance of yes and no means if a student is on an IEP, they would be on that yes column. If a student does not have an IEP, they would be on the no column. And the assessment itself, the scoring is done with a scale score, but it then determines there are cut points for the scale score, where a student is considered proficient if they score a 3 or above. And you can see off on the right, on the very end of the screen, you'll see the numbers 1 and 2, and those stand for percentages, and they just didn't have the space to fit inside the bar. So that's why they're kind of external. And this is, again, in the area of English language arts. So for math, very similar. performance levels as well. Again, this is students that are on IEPs. And I know that the percentage of students of our whole population under IEPs is around 13%. When we take the subset of 3rd through 8th grade, we don't have a good sense of the number of students that that bar actually represents because we chop off K to 2. I could look at the raw data and tell you what percentage, but ultimately you could probably project to be around 13% of the population that yes bar is representing. So this is economically disadvantaged, this subcategory. We only have 1 year of this. It was last year was the only year that it was available to us in the SBAC state reporting portal. Again, so if a student is economically disadvantaged, they would be represented by a bar that's labeled yes. If they are non-economically disadvantaged, it would be represented by the bar labeled no. And ELA is on top, math is on the bottom. You can just see with both subsets, you could see the significant difference in performance levels or percentages of students that are proficient. So this is that same data set for historically marginalized based on ethnicity and race. Again, that definition comes from the Agency of Education. So yes would represent a student that is a member of that historically marginalized ethnicity and race group. The N size for that group is around 65 students. So we had to take some demographic data, put students together so that we could get that N size and make it reportable. So over time, not a very significant difference. And this is in the area of English language arts. Here is math based on last year's assessment. And then so you see 1819, forgive me, I should have pointed out. The data set is from 1819 because we didn't have a 1920 SBAC assessment. It was canceled by the state. So there will be in the future graphs as well, you'll see a gap. Or in some instances, there won't be a gap, it'll just be omitted. We did lose a year of data. So this is distribution of students based on proficiency levels. The one on the left is for Bennington Rutland Supervisory Union, and the one on the right is the entire state of Vermont. So as I said before, you can see that 2019, 2020 is omitted because the state canceled that assessment. The N size for us, again, on years 18, 19 and down is around 750 students or so. The 2021 population was 660. All of the state of Vermont, again, 18, 19 down is about 35,000 students in grades 3 to 8 that take the test throughout the state. 2021 saw that number dip by about 4,000 kids. So the 2021 N size for the top bar for Vermont represents around 31,000 kids. We have, over time, we've been really in line with the state levels of performance, give or take a few percentage points. And this is in English language arts. And the next slide will be for math. You can see very similar performance. Again, all the caveats are the same, N sizes are the same as well. So similar performance over time compared to state. This one is probably the most jarring to see. It's important to remember that these performance levels are consistent with the state based on the last couple of data sets we've looked at. You'll see that there is no, in this instance, the 1819 or the 1920 bar is omitted. There is nothing there. Okay, so this is our performance over time in both mathematics and ELA for students in grades 3 to 8. This takes us to our academic goals for this school year. And that is to return to pre-pandemic levels of performance. So essentially it is to return to the levels of proficiency that we had achieved in 18-19. Because that was the last time that the assessment had been conducted pre-COVID. So it's about a 7% increase in ELA and a 13% increase in mathematics. It was a lot. So.
How does Vermont compare to national?
So SBAC is not a national assessment. It's one of the couple of assessments that states can elect to conduct. Some states actually have their own assessment systems.
How many states do you include?
I think the big one is California. I'm not necessarily sure that their performance data is, I mean, I assume it's readily available.
So I looked into this question. I don't know
You want to,
if you can hear me. No, it's okay. So I looked into this question, trying to get exactly the answer. The number of states has changed over the last, 6 years, and the data is not publicly available as like results for SBAC. When I've asked people about it, apparently there was at one point it was available, but I haven't been able to find it. I'm going to continue to look, but once we got that information, there hasn't been enough time and I haven't had success yet.
okay, let me, here, I can like stop, should I stop share? Yeah.
Dick has his hand up. Dick, go ahead.
Yeah. So essentially, correct me if I'm wrong. Essentially, last year with its hybrids and limited faculty student contact, especially at the weaker kid, caused significant increased problems in terms of both growth and overall performance. That's one conclusion. And the second conclusion is that over the last, we'll call it 4 to 5 years, although we have endeavored to improve relative to the state, essentially discounting the COVID situation, this explains why Randy's goals that we're going to review later in the meeting are exactly what they are. And it therefore is causing the system to take a much harder, more critical, more careful look at what we're doing, why we're doing it, and how we can do it better. Are both conclusions correct?
I would say that your first conclusion is correct, specifically to the area of mathematics. That's where we saw the greatest impact. Obviously, any kind of hybrid situation, and even though in this instance we did have the summer to plan for it, we weren't really sure how it was going to go. So I would say that yes, the instructional design had significant impact. Students were in and out of school. We were able to maintain, much to our efforts to improve upon the state level of performance, we were able to maintain consistency. So yes. And it's exactly how you articulated it. Randy's goals are very much designed to address the issues that we've uncovered.
A little tough to answer. Jen, I saw Jen's hand up, but if you guys want to use the hands up feature, that's helpful.
So Skylar, was all of that data that you just shown in person? I know SBAC would have to be in person because it was only administered to in person, but was the iReady also only those students who were in person? Okay.
Nope. So iReady placement, well, at that point, it's most likely because the assessment took place in the spring, there would be very minimal amount of students that took it at a distance. I know, like when we first, Jen, as you know, when we first started the year, we had kids taking it at a distance, and we tried to do it in a controlled environment. So that may have impacted growth for sure, but it wouldn't have impacted placement if we think about students in the spring taking it. Because typically, I think the majority of those kiddos were on site, like the vast majority.
I have a question.
Yeah.
How much overlap is there between those demographic breakouts?
So in terms of like intersectionality,
Right, so I assume that there are kids who fall into both economically disadvantaged and IEP.
Yep.
Is there a large degree of overlap, small? Like, give me an idea.
yeah, it's tough to tell, really. Like historically, we haven't had, we rely on our student information system, and we rely on that registration forms to be accurate. And in instances, there are some demographic factors that are omitted.
Mhm.
And that doesn't do us well to keep clean data in terms of like looking at intersectionality. I can tell you that the state reporting system, in terms of SBAC, which is what we rely on the state reporting system to get those results because we're not provided with them in any other way.
Right.
The tool that it has doesn't really allow for good measures of intersectionality to figure out like if a student's on an IEP, but also ethnically or racially historically marginalized,
Mhm.
that would be a good thing to know. The data management system itself that the state provides doesn't make that easy to get. So we have to pull stuff out and squish it together.
So this data is mostly anonymous or entirely anonymous. Like you couldn't go in and actually pull out any individual piece of this data. You only get it all together.
No, we could go in and look at individual students. Yeah. Typically at the SU level, we don't do that. The individual schools do.
So I guess what I'm asking is if you wanted, or you felt that you needed to know in those breakouts that you did demographically, how many kids were on an IEP and economically disadvantaged, you have the ability to do that.
Yes, so I can say that I've done that in the past,
Uh-huh.
and it is manual, student by student,
Right.
cross-referencing.
So it's not easy to do.
It is not easy. The summer that I did it,
Of course not, because
can't
it's
even
important.
begin
So
to
of course you
tell you-
can't do it.
Right, how many hours, probably days it took me to go cross-reference every single student. So from an operational kind of sustainability.
Right.
It was sort of an exercise that I would likely not do again.
Right.
But we're hoping
Yeah.
that EduClimber, once we get EduClimber in place as our data collection warehouse system, that we are hopefully going to have the ability to start looking at some of that.
Because it's pretty hard to draw conclusions from those demographic breakouts without knowing that.
It's limited,
Yeah.
right? It's all limited. That's part of the challenge.
Especially since we're not dealing with enormous data sets. I mean,
That's right.
900
Exactly.
kids is a lot, but it's not a lot compared to 4.5 million.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, it's one of the challenges of establishing that historically marginalized by ethnicity and race is the fact that set alone is comprised of students from 5 or 6 ethnic or racial groups, right? So that's, yeah, with small numbers, it is challenging. But to Randy's point, the product that we're just about ready to start with, there's a data call tomorrow to really get us started with EduClimber. It's a data management warehouse. So we will feed it spreadsheets and it will sort them for us.
Sounds great to me. I mean, because the reason I ask is because, I mean, you can, to me, looking at those charts at a glance, my immediate takeaway was clearly there's a huge drop off in the IEP category, more so than the other two demographics. And the, education, I mean, the, economically challenged group was also pretty significant. But it's hard to make a determination about where you need to focus your attention because you don't know how many kids fall into both categories. And it turns out that one category is dragging the other one down. You have no way of knowing that.
Mhm.
Okay, Jane, you had your hand up?
Yeah, I mean, just continuing on that line. I mean, I know we've talked about the snapshot and I know like what you're pointing out that the snapshot doesn't capture these things, but knowing what you're doing, to begin analyzing that data and I would think that that's going to be a common, a shared concern among other school districts in the state. Is this something that you've given back? I mean, I guess I would like to suggest that you consider giving this input directly to Snapshot so that they can also be helping to gather that data. I mean, I think that one of the things, you know, I think about with respect to collecting data and analyzing it is, you know, if we've got the state, the AOE is supposed to be collecting this and they want input to help look at the data points, our data set is only going to be good as much as the people give input to it. So I just would like to encourage you to consider that, you know, if you haven't been able to do that yet, because I think the entire state would benefit from that.
Yeah, I would, so they do, just to be clear, that they do collect demographic data, IEP status, and economically disadvantaged status. They do that, but the way that they report out on it is it's grade level specific and school level specific. So if I wanted to pull data at the SU level, that means I have to go into 5, 6 different grades, so grades 3 through 8, 6 different schools, pull all of it out, and then it's just cumbersome for a larger scale reporting. Their filtering tools exist at the grade level, but they don't exist as the holistic organization. So it is feedback that I provided to them. I would assume that it's useful to other places as well, so hopefully they'll respond. Although I do know that the actual snapshot itself isn't up to date, and they have challenges there as well. I know the data as is reported out in the snapshot in terms of the state level equity lens, it's an average of 3 years worth of SBAC scores. They use that to determine their growth. But with the omission of taking a test in 2019, 2020, it kind of kicks us back again. And we have to wait another 2 years until we're going to get an accurate measure of student growth.
I guess, you know, one question would be, is the agency of ed, you know, do they take our suggestions and our input and appear to, you know, take it in stride and like they're going to pay attention to it, or are they kind of just on their own planet?
Well, we're in the middle of that. I can't give you an answer yet.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah.
So far, there's been a very, very long delay in my most recent question. For Taconic and Green, actually for everyone, next month, you will see a very detailed summary of annual snapshot for the SU. So there will be a page and a lot of information in the packet for October's meetings. So it will give you an in-depth assessment of our current snapshot information. And you will, I'm in the middle of discussions with them about the data accuracy.
Okay. Other,
What's that?
should we move on to the
Yep.
next part? Yeah.
Just shrink that. Okay. Okay, so this is the other area of which the agency requires us to set a goal as a larger organization, as well as at our school level continuous improvement plans as well. So last year's goal was to reduce the number of significant incidents reportable to the state. Those reportable incidents includes things like suspensions, expulsions, hazing, harassment, and bullying complaints, violence, weapon possession and use, and unilateral move to an alternate setting. That's what falls under significant incidents in our school system. Reports all of the data around those incidents directly to the state. So last year obviously was a less than traditional school year. And we saw a 50% reduction in significant incidents going from 48 down to 24. So what you're seeing here is our local behavioral management data collection system. And the reason why this is a specific data set from last year and only 2 schools, and those 2 schools will keep anonymous, is that while five of our 6 schools utilize the system of gathering behavioral referrals, and these could be common things like disrespect to a teacher, or major things like would be a serious incident reportable to the state. In this data set, we just took 2 schools and analyzed them based on subgroup. So essentially 13% of our students in these 2 schools were students on IEPs. So they were consistent with the overall 13% of the 1,000 kids that we have. And 60% of the students that received an IEP, well, 58.8% of students that received an IEP or that received a referral were on an IEP. Okay, so only 13% of the population represented that percentage. So this one is, this data is from 18-19, which was the last complete school year that was unaffected by COVID-19. And we look at, this is some ethnic and racial data. So those of you who are in this room who have trouble seeing it, we have 2.4% of our students out of these 2 schools. Again, these 2 schools are different than the 2 schools we looked at before because it's a different data set from a different year. 2.4% are considered multiracial, 1.7% Asian, 2.2% Black or African American, 3.2% Hispanic or Latinx, and 90.3% white. So that is the ethnic and racial breakdown of those 2 schools represented in this data set. And then this is the percentage of students that had received referrals. So 48% of the referrals were for students that were in the Black and African American group. Okay. So seeing that disproportionality is represented in behavioral data, it led us to look at, this is actually discussed as part of our reset planning team work as well, and that is conducting a survey, and that's the psychological sense of school membership scale. We're going to conduct it next month and again in May of 2022. And it is scaled on a Likert 5-point scale. It's on a 5-point Likert scale, so a 0.5 increase in the mean or average is a pretty significant shift. So we're getting baseline data this October. We will gather that data and respond to it, take appropriate action as needed, and hopefully improve students' sense of belonging in school. Do you have hard copies? Okay. So I'll just a little bit more about the psychological sense of school membership scale. It's been around since 1993. It's about 18 questions, and it's a 5-point Likert scale. Just grab one of the questions examples. I'll read one off. So things like, I feel like a real part of, Manchester Elementary Middle School, insert school name there. Or, I feel, so some of them are reversed scale, so positive correlation, and 1 to 5 mean different things. Another one would be, I feel very different from most other students here. So you start to, yep. And this will be the first time that we utilize this.
But one of the challenges we had that we really identified last spring was that we had no consistent data across any of our schools. We had no ability to really feel like we could confidently look at patterns and trends around safe and healthy schools. This has a really strong evidence behind it. It's used, as Skylar says, it's been used for a long time, and that the responses get captured into 4 different categories: accepted, treated fairly, appreciated, and validated. And so you can get a very good sense of how students feel part of their community or don't feel part of their community. That can then guide our work. We know that students who feel a strong sense of belonging perform better academically, have fewer behavioral infractions. So we want something that we can look at patterns and trends over a long period of time. So we're gonna start it this fall and use this as our baseline year.
Yeah. Just curious, along with, using that as a, point to point, let's see, how we did, actually, it seems like a tool that would be very useful to kind of look at it using the first survey's results to,
Mhm.
Right,
you know,
exactly. A school
immediately.
can look at them and immediately look at patterns and trends within their school, patterns and trends within grade levels and classes. Teachers can use that to inform their programming and social emotional programming. It has widespread, quick applicability. So I'm looking forward to it.
And you're gonna, it would seem like it's tough. You got to present it in such a way that the kids really take it seriously and you know,
It's the way I always say it,
recognize the value of
Right.
the responses. Yeah.
I have another math question, sorry. On that breakout, how do we control for reporting or enforcement biases and getting that data
In the report, in what you just saw.
in the pie chart, where we look at the breakdown of.
Yeah.
So you're talking about
Right.
reportable incidents.
Yep.
Which means that someone is making a subjective decision about what to report to you, which then goes into
Yep.
what has to be reported to the state.
Yep.
So you could have incidences which aren't being reported, and there could be biases in which incidents get reported and which don't. That can affect your data. So if you don't have a way to control for it, you don't know if the data you're getting is clean. It's different than the test because the test is objective.
Yep.
And the test, everyone takes the same test and the answers are yes or no. There's
Yep.
no subjectivity involved.
So in at least 5 of our 6 schools, they practice something called PBIS, Positive Behavioral Intervention and Supports. Part of that process is to calibrate practices. So you take kids through expected behaviors and then you unpack reportable incidents essentially with adults so that there is some level of consistency or control. Granted, you know, depending on the school, like Sunderland has 13-ish staff members and Manchester has significantly more than that, right? So ensuring that people are calibrated and I guess perceiving the same behaviors in the same way, it's a challenge for sure.
So you have a cross-school policy that's consistent.
They're supposed to be.
Yeah.
I think that one of the pieces, you're absolutely right, and I'm gonna sort of draw this line. What is reportable is of such a nature that there's far less subjectivity. There's a much greater sense of subjectivity but when you get into lesser infractions. So, so if we were to go through the list that Skylar presented, it's pretty clear whether it did or didn't happen. But I think your point and the subjectivity is part of why we are taking that data and using it as a, do we really have an issue going on here?
Right.
And raising a red flag and also saying, let's do everything we can to get as accurate a data as we can to make sure that we're not jumping to conclusions that are not accurate.
I think the introduction of that scale survey will be enormously helpful.
We're
But,
hoping.
you know,
Yeah.
since it's a follow-on data question, you know, it's the old, you're giving us the number of incidents, but you could have one student that's responsible for
Right.
10 incidents.
Right.
That
Mhm.
means a whole different thing. The data you're getting is a whole different. And is there any way to kind of,
And the schools look at that.
yeah,
Schools absolutely
Right.
get down into that level. They know exactly whether they've got patterns like that.
Right.
but at the board level, when we look, we can't know whether it's a
Exactly
more
right.
widespread or a less widespread issue.
I can tell you that just based on looking at the data set, when I put it all together, that I mean, there wasn't any particular setting that resulted in anything, an outlier number,
Okay.
essentially.
Thanks.
Can I
Jane
ask-
or
Oh,
Deb, you had a question. Yeah.
Early, in one of the early slides, you said there were far fewer referrals, 24 instead of 48 referrals over the last year. Do you attribute that to just kids not being there, or are there some good lessons we might have learned from this awful year? What do you think?
I think, right. So just to clarify, it's not the number of referrals, it's reportable incidents to the state. So they have to be
All right.
of like
Okay,
extreme significance, right? So violence, bullying, harassment, hazing, things that have a place nowhere in our society.
right.
I would say a little bit of both. I would
Mhm.
say that there are instances where we surely saw that number of reportable incidents drop simply because maybe students who would tend to offend in that manner weren't present in our schools.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I know through anecdotal, just speaking with colleagues and building leaders, that, and many teachers actually felt like the transition times with COVID protocols, there was a reduced amount of transition times, which is typically where you see some of those
Oh.
behaviors occur. It's just unstructured, getting from point A to point B, or multiple students meeting up in the bathroom, or something of that nature. It was much more controlled environment last year. And that, I would say, has lent itself to a drop in incidents.
Mhm. Mhm. But were there smaller groups or more individual attention or
Yep,
any of that
Jane
stuff?
had a,
Mhm.
Yeah, so I'm aware that as a whole, in general, across the nation, that there tends to be a higher rate of referral for persons of color. But so I know it's a challenge for, I think, most schools. But a question I have is, I'm kind of curious to know, do you know what we're experiencing with those numbers, how we compare with other school districts in the state?
So that metric of PBIS data isn't widely shared. It's plugged into, so PBIS is an organization that's run by the University of Oregon. And we use in our schools, in 5 of our 6 schools, we use something called Swiss. And it is a data collection interface that not only doesn't actually filter to the SU level. So this is one of those instances where, in order to collect the data on reportable incidents, we have to go to individual schools, portals, pull the data, and then smush it together to get an SU level reading. So it's not something that's openly shared. There are national norms inside of Swiss itself. I'm not sure if it goes to demographics to the depth of which you just had asked about. I do know that it will account for school level enrollment. So essentially a norm group. It'll give you the national average of like referrals per day for a school the size of Sunderland with, 65 kids or whatever. It'll adjust to that. But as far as breaking down into demographic data, I'm not necessarily positive. It's not something that I've personally explored because, again, it is a school level feature. I can certainly check it out though.
okay, Dick, you,
Yeah. I'm a bit concerned about one of the questions in the sense that if a kid has done badly on a test or has gone out and is not feeling particularly popular that day, or in lots of different circumstance, you can say, I don't feel like I'm a part of the group, or I'm not as respected as I would like to be. Kids who have come to school who got dressed up in an outfit that they thought was terrific turned out to be criticized by the lovely ability of young people to call people directly to attention when you're not really part of the group. Alpha groups, beta groups, all are important groups that absolutely affect the way kids respond. And I think we need to be careful in having lots of opportunities, both informal and not, and the testing that gives some sense based on the daily interaction of teachers with respect to how kids are feeling. Because I certainly wouldn't want somebody who's economically disadvantaged, who had a horrible night, didn't eat much breakfast, didn't get to school on time, responding in a way which would be absolutely genuine. But that kid really does feel like they're part of the school. So I think we need to temper part of those responses with some solid teacher intervention and discussion. And I know that that takes place in almost all of the schools at the grade levels. And it's, I think, a more accurate measure of where kids actually are.
Just Dick, I think, one question on that, you, at the same time, you don't, if a kid reacts in a certain way, you don't want the teacher just to overwrite that and say, oh, they just had a bad day. You want to drill down into any of those situations, I would think.
And it would be intended to be like, okay, this is to your point, one data point. As I said, a school can look at patterns and trends. A grade level can, a teacher can. Teachers get together and review data very, very regularly. So they might look again at the patterns within their classroom. We had a lot of kids who said they didn't feel treated fairly. How might that inform my advisory or my morning meeting or my circle that I do? And identify those things and talk about them and build community and build culture. If you're doing that, which we know are best practices and they're best practices that our kids really need right now, those types of nuances will get fleshed out through that. So if it's all used in the way it's intended, you won't get stuck putting all your, I guess, eggs in one basket, for lack of a better word.
Okay. Other questions, comments, thoughts? Okay.
All set. Yep.
Thank you, Skylar.
You're very welcome.
Thank you.
Gary, it's kind of eye-opening in a lot of ways. I would love us to continue to kind of dig and try to understand a little bit better. You help us. I know you guys are doing that, but for us to kind of be a part of that and be able to learn some more lessons and figure out what kind of impact we can have, or what we should be doing.
So just to orient the board, I know we've talked about this a number of times, but this is the time of the year that we're presenting you with the data and with our
I muted.
Okay, better? Better?
This is
Okay.
awkward.
We're getting there. So right now, at the beginning of the year, you are seeing both the SU data from last year and how we did at meeting our goals that we shared with you last fall. Next, the next T&G meeting, you will be getting all of the school goals for T&G. Meadowy already got Meadowy's goals. So this is the time we're giving you progress towards achieving last year's and giving you next year's. Mid-year, after our mid-year assessment data, you will get an update on progress towards achieving goals by both the SU and your schools. And then this time again next year, or in August or in September, depending on sort of where I land, you will get the same type of presentation again. So that's the sequence and that's the timeline for how we're providing you with performance data, okay? So just, I think, making sure that I'm giving you the sequence and the timeline, because sometimes it can feel like you're not getting it, but actually to give you more frequent updates than that, it's our data's at macro level, school and SU is not sensitive enough for you to see growth in shorter increments of time, okay? All right, I also would just like to thank, we have a lot of principals who joined us from T&G. I'd like to thank you for joining. This is their opportunity to also take this sort of deep dive with us in SU data. Next week when T&G meets, you will only get a couple of pieces of it. So thank you all for all of your work and for joining us tonight. You can feel free to go if you want. I don't want you to feel like you have to stick around. So thank you.
Why would they want to go?
Okay, well, actually, Dave, it's still the Randy show, because incidental information, monthly update from the superintendent. I'm going to assume everybody has read the superintendent's report. So
right, we talked about superintendent report at the other meetings. You got that. So we probably don't need to talk about that, but I did include enrollment, which will also be in your local packets. So you will all see this in, except you, Eugene, but the other districts will see that your enrollment data again. So I don't know that you want to talk about it. I just wanted to make sure I included it informationally. But I am happy to answer any questions that you might have. I'm happy to give you a brief update though for unhappy information. I've shared with you information about these take-home COVID tests that we are piloting, and talk to you about an update on surveillance testing. It appears as if we're in this transitional process with the AOE. So what I know right now is that surveillance testing may be stopping in the format that it already exists, but it may not. Either way, we're still waiting for support from them. The AOE has talked to Medical Reserve Corps and National Guard. They're also trying to hire people. Many schools, many districts do not have the personnel to execute. And frankly, if you haven't heard, just as an aside, there are districts right now closing because they cannot keep up with contact tracing due to COVID right now in their schools. Schools closing, districts closing in order to do the work. So we are looking at significant personnel issues. You know, you heard Caroline talking about issues of paras as well. So we, because of sort of, I think my pretty consistent communication with the AOE about surveillance testing and how much I wanted to conduct it, but didn't have the resources, we were invited to be a part of a pilot group of districts to pilot these take-home COVID tests. So the COVID tests were supposed to come at the end of last week. And essentially, we could give them to somebody if they were sick. If somebody needed to quarantine, we could give it to them and say, hey, take this test on whatever day is, you know, the appropriate time as determined by the Department of Health. And then people can bring them back to us and we'll ship them for them through UPS, or they can take it and drop it off at their UPS store or with their UPS driver. And the free shipping, quick, easier way for families to navigate the testing process. So lots of positive feedback about that from families, from staff. So we got at the SU on Friday, 40 test kits. We did not know whether all the other schools also got kits, but we were supposed to have hundreds of them. So we weren't sure what this 40 represented. Come to find out, that was it. That was the delivery for the SU, were these 40. We figured that out late Friday. So today, some schools, because they knew that we had gotten a shipment, were already starting to say to families, hey, we've got some test kits, because some kids are symptomatic or kids are quarantining. So we immediately this morning start to look at the tests. That's, you know, we realized not everybody had them. How are we going to get them out to people? And then we realized that they sent us the wrong kits. Nothing was labeled. There's no shipping. There's no ability to process them. Oops, we sent you the wrong things. So this is sort of what it is like right now, trying to navigate this. And they're also trying to come up with another initiative. So I just want to let you know that we are staying as vigilant as we can be. It is not an easy, simple process. Some families who thought they were going to get a test kit are pretty upset right now, and understandably so. I'm trying to work with a nurse to figure out other ways that we can support this family. How might we be able to do it? Can we've got test kits. Can we somehow get them to the families and somehow ship them someplace? But that's not possible because I don't need to go into details with you of the logistics of that, but it's just a mess. And we're trying, and I just want to make you aware of it. It's not smooth sailing for us. So that's the only piece I'll add. Jane?
Yeah, I actually had an in-depth conversation with Dr. Stone from Urgent Care in Manchester last week. And the phenomenon that's happening, and I'm wondering if maybe it's getting to be maybe something that school boards might want to consider writing a letter about, which is, you know, we're seeing that really what needs to be happening medically in order to have enough tests, if you will, and for it to really do its job, is to really be using the antigen tests instead of the PCR tests. I mean, just to give you an example, last week, Dr. Stone was saying he was supposed to get like 2,500 PCR tests. He was down to his last 20. I mean, it's getting to be alarming. And I really think that this whole thing with everybody using PCR tests it's really creating a problem throughout the
Yeah,
entire
Jane,
state. Yes.
I think that you got a good point, but at the same time, that's the Department of Health and trying to deal with that. The antigen versus the PCR. I think that's, it's kind of hard for us to fight that battle, with Dr. Levine, I think, at this point. Is that fair or not?
I think if we were to say something with a no, I mean, I guess what I just want to say is, because I know talking with Dr. Stone and some other medical providers, I think there's a lot of discussion going around that maybe it's time for more advocacy that the antigen test be used properly in these kind of instances when you're dealing with large numbers and you're trying to isolate,
Yeah, I've seen some good arguments that, sort of the other countries and all as well. But, I think it's a really good point. It's just,
Yeah, the Department of Health is talking about ways in which antigen tests can be used appropriately at schools. There are other states that are doing that right now. They're looking at the models. They're in discussion about that. So when I talk about other things happening, that's another avenue. It's just hard to have confidence right now in what may or may not happen.
there are a lot of other countries that are doing that, pretty exclusively too. I mean, it's, yeah,
We never really got on the testing bandwagon at the beginning, the way that most other countries did. We didn't contact trace the same way that they did overseas.
other points you wanted to raise?
Nope, that's it. That's it for me.
Okay. All right, other questions for Randy and superintendent's report and all?
I just had a quick comment. I was looking at it and looking at the section on the, hopefully getting to looking at the whole regional middle school issue and the situation of declining enrollment and less stability for teachers as actually an opportunity. I find that interesting and a good reason to consider the regional middle school. It's counterintuitive, but I think it's right. What I was in the last paragraph, you talk about first steps. One of the steps that I thought would be also interesting that maybe you're doing, but wasn't listed, was whatever the latest literature is on the best practices in regard to regional middle schools. Just to have that as well, because I believe it's gone, I have the feeling it's gone in different directions. So I'd love to hear what the latest is on that as well.
Yeah. Do you want to just mute that for a second? So, so you will also hear information from me at the next series of meetings in October. On this, I have a document that I'll be including in the board packet as well, just as informational for you as I begin having conversations with the community in the next couple of months. And at this stage, I am, you will likely not hear that information now, where you will get that information is once I've collected the information as part of sort of a more holistic assessment of the feedback from our community, as well as the current status of what my concerns are within what we're doing and what the research says. So that will be part of it, of kind of what you hear. And I'm expecting late November, early December. That might be optimistic, but I'm still shooting for it. What you see, what I've written for the boards for next month, none of this does not apply to you, but for TNG, is my personal assessment of the conditions that warrant us talking about our architectural infrastructure and whether to support learning for our students. Okay.
Great. Okay, thank you. So moving on, governance process, legislative updates. Basically, there continues to be a lot of activity with task forces and all, but nothing really all that conclusive at this point. So I figured
It's me, sorry.
okay. No, so, I could talk about, people waiting and stuff like that, but there's nothing definitive enough to really bring up, so. So that's why you don't get a legislative written update this time, and I said I might give a verbal, but I don't think even that's very helpful at this point, so. So we, unless there are any questions on what's going on in the legislature and all that, happy to, okay. Then the annual meeting time. Now this, you guys, a
Nick
bunch
has a
of you are gonna
question.
recall that, in particular at the VSBA, I'll start with the VSBA annual meeting where every year the.
I had a,
Dick, yeah,
I
you
had a-
wanna?
I'm sorry, I had a brief question. I know that the teachers have written several board members a question about board level support or discussion with respect to healthcare. And I suspect that that has happened. I hope you and David will get together with respect to how the BRSU should respond to some of the teacher concerns.
Yeah, and that's what we actually, wanted to have a chat with Randy and all. David and I just, we've received comments from a few different people, questions, suggestions, and we got a very, a letter recently from from David PK that, provided some, some useful information on all too. And what Dave and I were thinking, and this actually throw it out for the whole group. We were, we thought that it would make sense to set up a meeting just to discuss, some of the issues that have been raised. We've seen a few letters that were, very consistent with kind of the NEA position, and we have some thoughts on that. We also, but honestly, it seems to make sense to have a discussion, a nice, open, frank discussion. And David and I, just today, we said, we'd like to do it as long as nobody thinks that's a horrible idea. Does anybody have Randy first, do you have
No,
a,
I have no concerns.
okay, other, board members, do you think that?
I think it's a good idea.
Okay, so hearing no, here you guys nuts, well, David and I'll try to set up a meeting. We said, with David PK and whoever else he thinks makes sense to be there. And it's, it's just gonna be, we've been trying to make sure we've done some, David and I being on the VSBA board, we feel like we've heard the discussion from that point on the statewide basis, tried to, educate ourselves. David's our head negotiator. So, we thought that it would make some sense. We'll try to, just be honest, frank, and reasonable and rational. I mean, I think it's in all of our interests that our teachers feel that, that we care about them and want to treat them well, but also understand, our full perspective and how we're seeing some things. So we'll try to be fair. Sue, yeah.
Just a question. Can you refresh my memory of timeline of negotiations at the state level, Jim? We're not
Yeah.
negotiating healthcare laws or that conversation.
Well, the healthcare, yeah, just to give everybody there was negotiation that ended without without much happening. So they went into, first they brought in, somebody like a mediator or something to try to help them. An agreement that really didn't work. Then they went to fact finding, where each side presented their viewpoints. And each side in the negotiation, this really means the employer commissioners and the employee commissioners, which are the employer commissioners, are really appointed by the VSBA. The employee commissioners are really, by the NEA, the Vermont NEA. And they each actually, their positions have shifted a little bit, I think, since the very beginning, but not drastically. they're still significantly apart. They both presented to a fact finder. They each had a decent amount of time to present to the fact finder what their, their case. And they're, still in that process. That'll be winding up. I think they're still in that process. That'll be winding up relatively soon, assuming that doesn't get anywhere, then it goes to arbitration. In the end, the answer is due by, if it fact finding worked, then it would be in November. If it doesn't, then December. I think
Is
it's,
that early?
yeah.
I'm just thinking in terms of we have a whole nother year right under the current contract. So we have lots of time. I'm asking because what I'm.
But it's also, it's not on the, it's on a calendar year instead of the
Exactly,
fiscal year. So,
exactly. So
yeah.
that's what I'm hoping is that we're not going to put in the position that we were the first time around, where we kind of found out what the facts were a few months before we had to implement it. It doesn't sound like that's going to be the case. Sounds like they're going to have to make a decision sometime in the next few months.
I believe the
It's not-
timeline is they're expected to have an answer by, it's like middle of December.
Cool. Okay, great, thank you.
Okay. Great. So, thank you for bringing that up. Okay, back on the VSBA annual meeting, basically each SU gets one vote. Each member SU gets one vote on, and that's really the issues being discussed are the VSBA resolutions that are presented. And there are a handful of those, and there are also some proposed changes to the bylaws.
I move, because you like to go to those things, that that you be our official designee to cast the vote, and
Okay,
that you
I-
consult with David, who
Actually,
probably
I'd-
will go as well.
Well, I'd like to have David as my backup officially, and then I'd really like to request all of you to take a look at their links to the videos, documents, all that stuff. Spend the time to go through it, and if you have thoughts, comments, issues, things, because honestly, you guys can all attend too, and you can speak directly. But if I'm going to vote or David's going to vote, then it's really helpful to know in advance what, if you guys have some issues, to make sure that, if you guys aren't there, that we still raise them, Is that the discussion is every bit as important as the vote.
So
Okay.
there wasn't a second to my motion. I hope someone will do it.
I second that motion.
Okay, Julie?
Yep.
Okay. So any further discussion on that? Okay, you have none. All in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, I think that's unanimous. Okay. And Herb, you're always welcome to make comments on this too, All right, in addition, there are also the Visbit, our insurers, Visbit and VHI, they're having their annual meetings, and I've got the documents for that here, which I'm signing. We don't know whether they're actually going to do that in person or not. If they're having an in-person thing, then I'll probably be up there. If not, then, probably just doing the proxy to the board is fine. It's basically who the board members are and stuff like that. So so I'd like to ask as well, if you.
I make the same motion I did with respect to both of those organizations. And
Okay.
David said he seconded it
I'll second.
Okay, great,
with the same provision that David be your backup.
good. Okay, on that, if you have any comments, but I don't think anybody's gonna have any comments on that fun stuff, who's on those boards and stuff. But we actually have pretty good representation on those. All right. So with that taken care of, the next point.
We didn't vote.
Oh, we didn't vote. I'm sorry. You're right.
Sorry.
All in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. Okay.
Once again,
Got
unanimous.
everybody? Good. Okay.
I move to support officially and approve the superintendent's goals as submitted.
Okay. There's also,
Second.
the second.
I'll
for
second.
Dean. What, Dean got to it? I was also hoping that, for the record, last time we basically did that. We spent like an hour. I think it was a very good process, and other boards have done the same, discussing and all, and that's useful for the board and for Randy. But, I looked at the minutes and we really didn't, we came out of executive session and then didn't really say anything. So I just wanted to have, a couple of minutes, not spending a whole lot of time, but if people wanted to have any reflections on the evaluation process itself, was it useful or not? Did we learn things, and is it a process that we should it's a slightly convoluted, a slightly different process for the next year, but do people think we're going the right direction with the evaluation process?
Jim, this is Julie. Hi. Do I have a
And
floor?
the evaluation committee is actually Julie, Dean, and I, so, yeah.
So I just think I really liked the way that it all came together. I like that we had an evaluation that led to goals that sort of support the evaluation and moves us in a direction that we need to go. And I think therefore that it seems like a good process. And certainly is, we're a body, right? So we can keep growing and moving and changing and adapting as we need to in the future. But as long as we have a pattern that maintains course, we have an evaluation which leads to goals, which supports the evidence that was uncovered in the evaluation. I think we're on the right track, and it's just our job to make sure that we keep seeing that pattern emerge year after year.
Great. Any other input, thoughts, David?
Yes, I'm going to sound like I'm saying same thing Julie just said. With the wide range of participation from different faculty, making comments and making honest observations that sometimes were critical, I think the evaluation really achieved its goal, and a wide range of issues were covered. It wasn't just your usual kind of thing. So I think it resulted in driving these goals that have a very broad scope and try to take in a lot of dimensions of what it takes, a lot of the dimensions that it takes and requires to create a good all-around learner and global citizen. So I'm also very supportive of the whole process and impressed by the results.
Thanks. We don't need more, yeah.
Oh, she just went
We're
this.
just giving it thumbs up, okay.
Yep, I agree. And I appreciate Randy's reporting on it to us at our last meeting. That was really useful.
Call a
Okay,
question.
So, yes, please.
Call the question.
Oh, call the question. Oh, okay. Yeah, so, all those in favor, the motion was to essentially make a statement that the board supports and is behind the goals set by the superintendent.
And approves of them.
And approves of them. All in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, no opposed. Great, so that's unanimous. Thank you. All right, now we have a separate little issue and we're looking for.
Do you want a motion to go into executive session?
Actually, David has a motion.
Yes. So
Oh,
I
I'm
was
sorry.
about to make
It's gonna be a
motion.
double motion.
and you can second it, Dick. That would be wonderful. I hereby move that the board finds that the premature general public knowledge of confidential attorney-client communications made for the purpose of providing professional legal services to the board would place the board at a substantial disadvantage. So.
Okay, that's the first motion.
I second it.
Okay. Any discussion on that? Everybody understand that? Okay. Great. Then all in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, that looks unanimous.
The next motion is based on the previous finding by the board. I hereby move that the board enter executive session pursuant to 1 VSA section 313A, 1F, and invite the board's legal counsel and the superintendent.
Okay, is there a second to that? Julie? Okay, all in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, we've got everybody there. Yep, okay, unanimous. Great, so we'll move into executive session. Thank you all.
Just
for
need to-
going. Oops, sorry. Okay, quick before we had the legal counsel superintendent, does anybody have an objection to our business manager also being, Sue Wilborn being a part of this?
No.
Okay, great. So we're gonna include her in the executive session as well.
Okay, my computer believes we need to stick by the 2-hour rule.
We're way over that.
We are way over that. So, okay, we've got after this reflection on norms. I think we reflected. Communications, no further. We did have one other point that just wanted to raise real quick and get your input on.
Need to log that you came out of executive session at 9:07 or 9:08, something like that, okay?
Yep.
Hey, I'm sorry, Jim, just one second. Good night. It was very nice talking to you all.
Thanks, Dana.
Thank you.
Appreciate it as always.
Yep.
All right. There was one other item that, wanted to touch base on. Actually, Jane had brought up before and was, Jane, Dick, or David and I were going to be working together on trying to, make some communication on the idea that, on children vaccinations, which, did you want to give a quick, Jane, where that stands? Because basically what, we're kind of looking at, hoping to discuss is we were talking about putting a letter together or something. And I proposed to David that we take it directly to the VSBA to discuss it, to try to get some feedback at the VSBA. But Jane, do you want to frame the issue real quick?
Sure. I mean, you mean you want me to recap or just bring it to where it's at present?
No, just where it's at.
Okay, so where it's at is I've been in discussion with the president of the Vermont Nurses Association, and they also have a committee that is their like legal advocacy committee. And we're going to be meeting in about, I think it's another week that we meet, and that they are planning to bring this up as a point of discussion with when the legislation is back in session. But that's not until next year. But, I mean, that's where we're at. So we haven't drafted anything, but they've already told me that they've had discussions with a couple of people in the legislation it sounds like there's some preliminary support. When it gets down to working with the other nursing professions, or nursing groups, it sounds like they're probably leaning toward a survey going out because of really wanting to find out what level is going to pass. Meaning that right now Vermont is considered where it's left to the discretion of the medical provider to waive that right, which is kind of seen as being in the middle of where, you think about emancipated youth having that right to vote, or right to get the vaccination. And I think that they're just wanting to move it forward instead of it being stifled. So, yeah, there's not.
So what we had discussed was, trying to maybe bring something ourselves to, just sounded like David and I were just chatting and sounded like it might make some sense for Jane to write up a real, quick and short, and then us just to present it. It's the VSBA resolutions are already in the can. We discussed those earlier and all.
Okay.
But for this year, but at the same time, what David and I can do is bring it up as a discussion item for the VSBA board and then try to get the feedback. The benefit there is, if we kind of present it, then we can get the feedback from all around Vermont, as to, from districts all around, just here's the issue, here's what we're thinking, let's have a quick discussion and, see what kind of feedback we get.
Okay,
That
that's
might be-
great.
Okay.
Yeah, I actually have what I can do, that probably the quickest thing is I can send you and David the letter that I sent to the president of the Vermont Nurses Association, to the Vermont Pediatric Academy of Pediatrics.
That would be great, because I think, our board discussed it and we all seem supportive of it. So it's, it'd be good just to get that in front of the SBA and get some feedback.
Okay,
So I
will do.
just wanted to make that as a quick item and then entertain a motion.
So moved.
Okay, second? Deb, I'll give that to Deb. All right. All in favor of adjournment, then thank you very much for your patience.
Sorry I kept you late.
Hands up. Okay. Thanks, everybody.